Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. All right, welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Okay, we are continuing our series on abuse in the school. Hopefully you all got a chance to listen to last week's episode with Laura Dunn. She is a Title IX expert, and it was very enlightening.
It sure was. And if you happen to have missed that, please do go back and listen to it. It is filled with information for teachers, for school administrators, for parents, for grandparents. We need to hear this. We need to be aware of what Title IX is, how Title IX should be working, what we can do to be an advocate for Title IX.
Yeah, I think what really resonated with me is that this has been the law since 1972.
Right.
It's already in place. It's just not being enforced.
Right.
And, one of the things that Laura said is that it's in the school's best interest to not inform parents and even other staff. As far as as far as lawsuits are concerned, it's in the school's best interest, ironically, to keep Title IX hush-hush. But from a preventative stance, or even from rectifying situations where you have students being sexually harassed by other students or staff, it's absolutely in the best interest of that child for the school to publicize Title IX.
Is.
So,
right.
Yeah, I thought it was really good information and certainly helpful on a practical level.
Well, actually, I thought she went out on a limb, even to a great extent, sharing her own experience.
Yeah.
And how Title IX came to work in her life. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, by all means, go back and listen to that episode if you missed it.
And next week, to put a plug in, we will be interviewing a good friend of mine, Joe Scorsone. He's with the Christian band Flint Face. Joe is an abuse survivor, and he's on tour right now called the Take Back Your Voice Tour. And it originally was he and his wife, Beth, who was also in the band. But due to some transportation issues, Beth had to come back home with the kids, and so Joe is out on tour by himself without the rest of his family, which is pretty heartbreaking. But
it's for 4 months.
Yeah, he's doing it for the total tour. I think was just shy of 6 months.
Okay,
and he's going to be playing at over 300 schools, and he's focusing on suicide prevention. And so Joe personally has experienced battles with suicide attempts and suicidal thoughts and depression and anxiety and all those things. And so what I appreciate about him is that he's actually out there doing something about it. And it's really hard work. It's not like he got booked and he's out there just strumming his guitar and playing. It is really hard work, and we connect by phone, usually at least once a week. And, he is just a really super down to earth guy. So, I greatly respect and appreciate what he's doing. And, he's going to have a lot of really powerful stories to share with us on this episode.
Right. And I do not know him. Jimmy knows everybody, don't you? There's not
you met him, though, didn't you?
No. What?
You met him.
I met him once via here, but I don't know him like you do to talk to him often. But I'm looking forward to getting to know him even more. And I agree with you, Jimmy, in saying this is not fun work for him. It's hard,
No, yeah.
hard, labor intensive, very draining. And to be separated from his family yet on top of it makes it even more difficult. So let's keep him in our thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, it'll be very powerful, and I'm excited to do an interview with him and just hear the stories of success, because I think so often we hear all the things that abusers are doing and all the damage that they create, all the carnage that they leave behind. Well, it's nice to hear success stories. And even though it's really hard work, he's out there doing the hard thing and he's saving lives.
Absolutely.
And, kids are coming to him and sharing their stories, and, it's powerful and really encouraging, super encouraging. So, yeah, I'm excited for that. Today, as we continue the series, we're going to talk about how we can equip our kids, whether it's your kids or your grandkids, but how do we equip them to go into the schools and to really have a bigger awareness of, one, what abuse is, and two, how to fend off people who are potentially abusive. And, I think those are skills that we really have to teach our kids, and we really have to have these conversations as parents and grandparents, because the kids are such an important part of this equation. And if we're just equipping adults, we're missing a huge component to prevention. And, the abuse that happens in isolation, we're never going to see that happen, because that's what abusers do, right? They take kids, they isolate them in a classroom, in a car, in the parking lot. The amount of teachers that molest or have sex with students out in the car in the school parking lot is astounding. There's a great percentage of teachers that are doing that. And so how do we talk to our kids about, if a teacher wants to get you alone and take you out and, get you to open up your heart and talk about problems that you're having at home or whatever their guise is, how do we teach our kids to stop that, to put a stop to that? Because kids don't know, they think that, oh, a teacher really cares. They really care about me, and they want to hear about my troubles.
Well, part of being,
and it makes them vulnerable.
Right. Part of being in the role of a teacher, or whether it's teacher, pastor, doctor, nurse, whatever, we think of that person as someone that we are to respect, that we are to trust.
And that doesn't have ulterior motives.
Right. And we teach our children that. And, at least I was taught that day in and day out. Respect your elders, no matter who it is. You never talk about them. You never say a bad word about them, whether it was teacher or Bible school teacher or whatever. Always respect. And we still expect that of our children. However, I think, Jimmy, what we're about to share with our listeners is vitally important, because we live in a different world right now. I don't know. We've talked about this time and time again before. I don't know if abuse is more prevalent or if we're just simply aware of so much abuse, but it's here. And
I think it's a little bit of both. Yeah,
probably.
I think certainly there's a heightened awareness, and there are more people who are reporting it. But at the same time, with the advance of the internet and all these stinking apps that just are an open window into our kids' souls, we are really making them extra vulnerable. And if you look at human trafficking and who's being trafficked now, it's far different than 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was, they would intentionally find that, they would kind of, they would scout social media and look for the young kids who are kind of posting about how bad their lives are and how messed up everything is. And so they would intentionally target really vulnerable young kids or teenagers the ones that we're talking about. I wish I would just, get the courage and run away from home, things like that. Now, if you look at who's being targeted 10 years later, it's anybody and everybody.
Right.
And they can have perfectly great, normal, happy homes. They can be in a loving home where mom and dad are just excellent parents.
Mm-hmm.
They're every bit as vulnerable as the next kid down the road because it's the access. So yeah, I think it's both and. I think there's a heightened awareness. It's being reported more, thankfully. But yeah,
it's certainly something that we need to know how to deal with, for sure, because like it or not, this is part of our lives now.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're a parent, it is part of our daily lives. If we're a grandparent, we need to be in tune with this also.
Yeah.
Often kids will go to a grandparent before they'll talk to a parent. And it's always been that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it still is. But if grandparents don't know what's going on in today's world, they can't help. So I think this is vital information for all of us.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too, besides for all the apps and just the easy access, we talked about this just briefly in a previous episode, but we're putting personal devices into the hands of every single kid, and it's unmonitored. And there was a recent study that was done a couple years ago, or within the last couple years, and I wish I could remember the source right now, but it was something like 83 or 85% of kids by the time they're 12 have seen hardcore pornography on their phone. And I think this was a study that was done in the UK. And if you think about that, my she's 9, soon to be 10, and 85% of people within her age group are viewing hardcore pornography. I mean, that didn't happen even when I was a kid.
No.
We just didn't have the access. And, if anybody saw pornography, it was like, if somebody was courageous or dumb enough to get into their dad's stack of Playboys and bring them into school and, sneak them into their book bag and bring them into the school, which was extremely rare.
Yep.
That was your sole access to anything pornographic. Now, I mean, my goodness, turn on the TV and look at all the propaganda and all the bull crap that they're just peddling so hard, and we've become so desensitized to it. And we've really limited the amount of TV that we watch in our home. And I look at all these shows, and I mean, you cannot get away from the hypersexualization, and they're just jamming it down our throats constantly. And then everybody wants to cry wolf and say, "Oh, well, look at how certain men and women are objectifying. They're objectifying people, and they're being so sexual." Well, duh.
Right.
I mean, that's all we
Our
see.
culture has
witness.
changed. And when you keep stressing when we see, there's something that happens to us when we visually see something.
Mm-hmm.
It's far different than hearing something. But when we see it, there is an imprint, I believe, that's made on the mind. And the more that imprint is seen, the more you used it, desensitized we become.
Yeah.
It seems more normal to
and
just see that.
especially when you're at a young age and
Right.
you don't have a context for sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where we really start getting into trouble. And, that's the kind of stuff that our kids are seeing. And at the same time, we're not really teaching them about sexual abuse and what constitutes sexual abuse and what boundaries are and healthy boundaries. And there was a movie that just came to my mind. It was a cartoon, and I can't even remember what it was, but one of the characters was like one of the cartoon characters was twerking in the movie. And this is like a PG Disney movie. And I remember seeing that with our kids, and I was like, this is unbelievable. Like
right.
the amount of sexualization, even in the cartoons, is crazy. It's everywhere.
Well, it sure
you can't
is.
get away from it.
No, it's all over.
But then we drop a cell phone into the hands of all these kids, and we don't monitor, and we're just like, good luck. And it's no wonder. Then we act shocked whenever all these predators are gaining access to our kids, and we shouldn't be shocked at it. We should expect it, because that's what predators do. When you understand how predators work, of course they're going to get in to these kids' phones. They're going to get access. Of course they're going to do it. Right. That's what they do.
Well, that's absolutely.
So, how do we help guard against teachers? And I always go back to just teaching our kids to have discernment. Kids are very concrete thinkers, especially younger kids. They're just black and white. Everything is black and white. But discernment is taught, and it can be taught at a young age. You can teach your kids how to make informed decisions. One of the things that drives me crazy is when parents tell their kids to do something, and the kids, of course, they always say, why? In the whiny voice, why? Well, one of the worst responses, in my opinion, is because I said so.
Right.
Because what you're communicating to that kid is, I'm the adult, you're the kid, I'm smart, you're dumb, and
if I say so.
If I say it, you do it.
Right.
And you don't question it. Well, I think a healthier response is, and it takes a little bit more time, but when you hear the whiny, why? You explain why they should do something or not do something. You say, well, because if you go down this path, these are the consequences. And if you go down this path, these are the rewards. And you explain it. You take time to explain it. And you show them how things work. And so we communicate with our kids, about sexual abuse and just any violation of boundaries. We don't just say, hey, if anybody violates a boundary,
right.
Smack them down or whatever. You like
that doesn't do it.
No, they have to be able to think through and process and not short circuit the process to get from point A to point B. They have to be able to think through it and reason through it and understand why they're doing what they're doing. And they have to understand that a teacher who says, hey, it's lunchtime, why don't you come out and sit in my car with me and we can talk? Instead of just saying, well, you just don't do that. They need to understand why and tell them, because first of all, it's highly inappropriate. It's highly unprofessional. But the other part of that is nobody can see you out there. And not every teacher has good intentions.
Right.
And in fact, there are a whole lot of teachers, a whole lot of them, that exploit children by taking them out and isolating them, and under the guise of they want to talk to them and they want to express care and concern and compassion. That's what abusers do. And if we tell our kids that, I think we can tell them that even at age 5, they're smart enough to where we can begin having those conversations with them. If your teacher wants to keep you in the room after school lets out or whatever, the classrooms change from one class to the other, and your teacher wants to keep you behind and just hang out with you because they're calling you their friend. Well, that's not okay.
As I'm listening to you, Jimmy, my mind has gone back over 50 years. I'm not going to tell you how far beyond 50 years, but back to way back, as the saying goes. I had a teacher, Miss Whiting. She was a black teacher, which was totally unheard of in New Jersey at that time. We just didn't have black people in our neighborhood, let alone as a teacher. Miss Whiting took an interest in me because I was extremely shy. And I think that's a large part is due to my home life being a really wrecked up home life. But Miss Whiting would keep me after school to wash the blackboards. We don't do that anymore, I guess. I don't know. But then she would drive me home. And I remember on those rides home, she would talk to me. And, she was the kindest, most wonderful person in the world. How sad it is that today we have to have that polar opposite discussion with our children saying, don't trust your teacher. I remember you being driven home by Miss Miller.
Absolutely.
Sitting in the car. She was wonderful.
It was and still is one of the nicest people on the face of the planet.
Amazing. And she took an interest in you. And I so appreciated that. But today we have to talk to our children and have these hard talks. And what a shame it is that this trust has been so betrayed by so many that we have to have these talks. It's very sad. It really is.
But
but we have to do it.
Absolutely.
We have to.
People could make the argument, well, it's a fraction of the teachers out there who are abusers. Well, that's true. But the ones who are using isolation in order to gain access to their kids. And
it's a fraction until it becomes our child. And then it becomes a personal trauma. And fractions are, fraction means you're thinking in the distance and not going to happen to me. But we have to take these precautions and have these hard talks with our kids. One of the best ways I can think of to talk to a child is similar to what I used to tell you kids when you had household chores. Every one of my 11 kids had a chore to do, and they didn't get paid for it, by the way. Their payment was they were part of the family, and that's what they were told. Well, why do I have to do the dishes? Why do I have to? I never had a dishwasher. My kids were my dishwashers because
slave labor. You hear this, people?
Yes, terrible. Because you are part of this family. And as part of this family, you kids were told, we do certain things to keep the family running smoothly. Well, as far as teaching children, maybe the first aspect is your body is yours and is to be respected. And your body was made, in God's image and is, special. And there are perimeters of our bodies. There are, and teacher, of course, not every family, believes that. And it makes it really tough how to get through to our children. But there are all different ways of talking to them.
Well, I think the other thing that's really important is not just teaching them about their own bodies and, helping them figure out what the healthy boundaries are and those sorts of things, but how to have an awareness for when other students' boundaries are being violated. And I think this is just inherent in most, if not all, children, but they want to help other people. If they see somebody who's struggling or somebody who's being picked on or somebody who's feeling uncomfortable, they want to step in. And, our kids, they want to be that person. And, they'll tell us stories about kids that were being picked on. And Natalie and I will say, well, what did you do? What did you do about it? Because,
how can you get help?
It's one thing to say, hey, I observed this was happening. This kid was being picked on the playground and was being bullied. But our question is always, what did you do about it? And that conditions them in a way where they realize they're not a bystander. They're the person who has the power and the ability and the wherewithal and the knowledge to step in and defend that person.
Well, we know
and they do it.
That adults are mandated reporters. We can have our little mini reporters here, but and that's where, if you would explain more fully, what does a child do in coherence with Title IX? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to have a Title IX coordinator who's designated, and they have to know who it is. But yeah, kids absolutely have the power and the right to report abuse that's going on by other students. And if you have a teacher who just doesn't care, which unfortunately that happens, you have teachers that they're too busy, or they're too old school, or they're too whatever, and they're just not going to take those allegations seriously. They have to know that there's another avenue besides for your teacher. Your teacher is not your only option.
Right.
That's the other thing. We condition people, and it's amazing how I see this play out well into adulthood, especially in the churches, where people feel like their only option is to inform a leader. And if that leader shuts them down or shuts them up, then they throw their hands up and they say, what other option is there? I did everything I know how to do. And I'm like, well, what about the obvious? The obvious is you step in and you defend the person who's being abused, and report it to the police. Inform other parents at your church. If you have a predator at your church and the leadership refuses to inform people, which happens really often, you have every right to inform other parents and say, look, I have this concern about this person, and here's what this person did. You have to be specific. It can't just be, well, I have a feeling about somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Be specific and share that information with other people. You have every single right as a human being to do that.
Well, what happens, Jimmy, if a school does not have an active Title IX? This was hit on last week.
Yeah.
Just very briefly, if there is a school who does not have an appointed designee as a Title IX coordinator, where does a student go?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Laura talked about that in the episode last week.
Right.
She said, go to the school board, show up, make a suggestion or make a motion for them to select and communicate who that Title IX coordinator is. If they do that, or refuse to do that, then make a report, turn them into the Board of Education.
There you go. Right.
And, she said that, they won't be fined. A school has never been fined for being out of compliance. So that's, as a parent, that's one avenue. But I think what most schools do is they tell students that if there's any infraction of any sort, if you can't tell your teacher or your teacher's not doing anything about it, go to the guidance counselor. That's all good and fine, but you have guidance counselors as well who are not trauma informed. I've personally met guidance counselors that know nothing about abuse. They know absolutely nothing about abuse, and they don't know anything about abusers. They don't know anything about abuse dynamics. And so we can't expect that just because they're a guidance counselor, they're going to know how to respond. So I think as parents, that's a conversation that you should have with your individual school and ask them, is our guidance counselor trauma informed? Or at a bare minimum, do they know how to handle allegations of sexual abuse?
I think that is a vital question, Jimmy.
Yeah, and if the answer is no, then we need to ask that school, and this is not unfair to ask them to do it. They need to send that guidance counselor and pay for it, for them to go to training and get further training so that they know how to handle allegations of abuse.
And amen. And there is funding to do it.
Sure.
Absolutely.
But,
Absolutely.
we don't know what we don't know. And so if we're not asking those questions of our school district, we just automatically assume, well, all is well and, everybody's trained and they'll know how to handle my kid if my kid alleges that they're being abused. Well, I would never assume that. In fact, I would say it's probably safe to assume the opposite, that they typically don't respond well, or they've not been trained well. And so start asking those questions and go to the school board, get involved, And
those are the two words I wanted to hear come from your mouth. Get involved.
Yeah,
we need to
and
be
help them.
involved with our children's lives, with our children's teachers, with our schools, and before the fact, not after.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, those are some tips that hopefully will give a little bit of guidance. I know they're not really super specific, but
I think involvement is specific. I think it's key, Jimmy. Having served, I know I mentioned time and time again, I was on our school board for 15 plus years. When a parent comes to the school board listens and they pay attention all the time. And school boards have a great amount of authority to put in place some kind of a program, something, or to appoint the Title IX coordinator, to get things moving.
Yeah.
So don't feel that we are powerless. Go to your school board, go to your school, talk to your children, get involved.
Yeah, and don't be a frenemy either. don't pretend like you're friends with them and then you're bad talking the school board and making a big stink. Like actually link arms with them and help them.
Absolutely.
And
yes, important.
Partner with them and be polite, be kind, and be bold, and just let your yes be yes and your no be no, and help them to make informed decisions. Because chances are not many people have stood beside the school board and said, hey, we want to help you become more informed on abuse dynamics. So I would hope that they would welcome that and that they would allow you to partner with them. Well, we're going to wrap up. That's our truth bomb for the day. Get involved.
Absolutely.
And stay tuned for next week. We will interview our good friend Joe Scorsone, and stay tuned for them. Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you next episode.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. Thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcast, or Stitcher. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.